The Coal King's silent debt on the morning of November 14th, 1922. The residents of Blackwood County witnessed a spectacle that would haunt the Appalachian peaks for a century. Cyrus Thorne, a man who owned the land, the air, and the very lungs of every man who worked it, stepped onto the porch of his iron-gated estate. Beside him stood his only daughter, Elara. She was 21, dressed in silk that cost more than a miner's life, but her eyes were vacant. She hadn't uttered a sound since she was 11 years old. The town called her the Silent Doll. The doctors called her incurably demented. But Cyrus Thorne didn't call for a doctor that morning. He called for a prisoner. From the back of a coal wagon, they hauled out Elias Vance. Elias was a man of 30, his skin permanently stained with the bloom of the deep mines, his lungs coughing up the black dust of a decade's labor. He was a cursed miner, a man who had survived 3 separate cave-ins that had killed everyone else. The men believed he was a jinx. The company believed he was a radical. He was scheduled to be hanged by the company police at noon for his role in the Great Strike. Instead, Thorne made an announcement that silenced the wind itself. "The miner lives," Thorne declared, his voice like grinding stone. "On one condition. He is now the sole guardian of my daughter. He will take her to the shacks of the hollow. He will feed her, he will clothe her, and he will keep her from the light of day. If she dies, he hangs. If she speaks, he dies slower. Why would a millionaire hand his precious daughter to a man he intended to kill? What was hidden in the throat of a girl who couldn't scream? And what did Elias Vance find when he finally looked beneath the silk bandages wrapped around her neck? Today we go deep into the hollow vein. We uncover the ritualistic corruption of the Appalachian elite, and the night the mountains finally screamed back. Chapter 1. The Shack in the Shadows. To understand the horror of what followed, you have to understand Blackwood County in 1922. This wasn't just a place. It was a kingdom of soot. Cyrus Thorne was the king. He owned the company store, meaning the miners were paid in scrip that could only be spent at Thorne's prices. They lived in Thorne's houses. They were buried in Thorne's dirt. Elias Vance had been a thorn in Cyrus's side for years. Elias was literate, a rarity in the mines. He read law books by candlelight. He told the men that their blood wasn't fuel for the company's furnace. When Elias was dragged to the hollow, the poorest section of the county, with Elara Thorne in tow, the other miners watched from behind cracked shutters. They didn't see a rescue. They saw a death sentence. The shack Elias lived in was a one-room lean-to made of scrap timber and tar paper. It smelled of wood smoke and the bitter metallic tang of the black lung. Elias pushed the door open. He didn't speak to the girl. He couldn't. The company guards were watching from the ridge, rifles glinting in the pale winter sun. He pointed to his bed, a sack of corn husks. Elara sat, her movements stiff, like a clockwork machine running out of tension. For the first 3 days, there was only silence. Elias worked the small garden patch he had left, his mind racing. He was a dead man walking. He knew Thorne didn't give him Elara out of mercy. He gave her to him because Elias was a disposable container for a secret Thorne couldn't keep in the mansion. On the 4th night, the wind began to howl through the gaps in the shack's walls, a sound the locals called the widow's wail. Elias was sitting by the hearth, cleaning a small piece of mountain laurel root, a natural remedy for his coughing fits. He heard a sound, a rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. He froze. He looked at Elara. She was staring at the floor, her finger rhythmically hitting the wooden arm of her chair. Tap, 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 tap. Elia's heart hammered against his ribs. In the mines, when the air grows thin and the rocks shift, communication is impossible by voice. Miners use the tap code on the pipes to tell the rescue teams if they are alive. Tap, 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 tap. In the darkness of that shack, Elias realized the girl wasn't demented. She was a miner, or at least she knew their language. He leaned forward, picked up a heavy hearthstone, and tapped back. Tap, tap, tap. The code for "Who is there?" Alara's eyes, usually dull and unfocused, suddenly snapped to his. For the first time, Elias didn't see a silent doll. He saw a prisoner looking through a keyhole. Chapter 2. The Slow Awakening and the Overseer's Eye. For the first 14 days in the hollow, Elias Vance didn't just fight the cold. He fought the feeling of being watched. Cyrus Thorne didn't just dump his daughter in a shack and walk away. He left a sentinel. Every evening, at the stroke of 6, a man named Black-Eyed Silas, the company's head overseer, would ride his charcoal-gray horse to the ridge overlooking Elias' cabin. Silas was a man who had lost his humanity in the 1910 mine fires. He carried a whip tipped with coal shards and a spyglass that never left the shack's single window. This created a deadly game of theater. Inside the shack, Elias had to pretend Alara was still a vegetable. He had to keep her slumped in the corner, her eyes vacant, whenever Silas's shadow fell across the porch. "How's the doll today, Vance?" Silas would bark, his voice a gravelly ruin. "Still silent," Elias would reply, never looking up from his bowl of thin corn mush. "Still mindless. Good. Keep her that way. The king doesn't like his property getting ideas." But the moment Silas's horse trotted away, the theater ended. This is where the true awakening began. Elias realized that the laudanum-lead mixture Thorne had been feeding Alara was more than a sedative. It was a memory eater. As Alara's mind cleared, she began to experience the flooding. Her memories didn't return in order. They came in violent, sensory bursts. One night, she gripped Elias' arm so hard her fingernails drew blood. She wasn't tapping code. She was shaking with a vision. She pointed to the fireplace. Elias watched as she grabbed a charred piece of wood and began to draw on the whitewashed walls of the shack. She didn't draw pictures. She drew maps. She drew the veins of the mountain as if she could see through the rock. She marked the sulfur pits, the methane pockets, and then a series of red X's in areas marked unstable. Elias realized with a jolt of horror that these weren't just maps of the mine. They were maps of the mansion's foundations. "You've been planning this since you were a child," Elias whispered. Alara looked at him, her eyes burning with a lucidity that was terrifying. She traced 3 words into the dust on the floor. "He killed her." "Who, Alara? Who did he kill?" She traced. "Mother." The official record stated that Cyrus Thorne's wife, Lillian, had died of a broken heart shortly after Alara's birth. But the map on the wall told a different story. Alara drew a small, hidden chamber beneath the mansion's conservatory, a room that wasn't on any architectural plan. Elias realized that the hollow vein society didn't just sacrifice miners. They sacrificed anyone who threatened the purity of the bloodline. Lillian Thorne hadn't died of grief. She had been the first vessel to be discarded when she refused to let Cyrus clip their daughter's vocal cords. This discovery changed everything. Elias wasn't just protecting a victim. He was harboring the only witness to a double decade of serial murder. But Silas was getting suspicious. The overseer noticed that the doll was sitting more upright. He noticed that the shack's walls were covered in charcoal markings that Elias tried to hide with old potato sacks. One afternoon, while Elias was down at the creek fetching water, Silas didn't wait on the ridge. He dismounted. He kicked the door in. Chapter 3. The trial of Bone and Lara was alone. She was sitting at the table, staring at the charcoal map she hadn't finished covering. Silas stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the light. "You're a pretty thing when you're not drooling, aren't you?" Silas sneered. He walked to the wall and ripped down the potato sack. He saw the maps. He saw the names of the Hollow Vein members written in soot. His hand went to his pistol. Thorn was right. You're a witch, a leak in the pipe. But Alara wasn't the helpless girl of the mansion anymore. She had spent the last month eating the protein-rich squirrel meat Elias hunted and breathing the mountain air. As Silas reached for her, she grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the hearth. She didn't scream, she couldn't, but she moved with the precision of someone who had spent 10 years watching men fight in the shadows. She swung. The iron connected with Silas's temple with a sickening thud. Silas collapsed, but he wasn't dead. He was a brute, built of gristle and hate. He lunged for her ankles, dragging her down to the dirt floor. This is when Elias returned. He saw the door swinging on its hinges. He heard the muffled struggle. Elias didn't use a tool. He used his bare hands. He threw himself onto Silas's back. The two men rolled through the dust, a miner's desperation against an overseer's cruelty. "I'll hang you both," Silas wheezed, his fingers clawing for Elias' throat. "I'll see your bones in the pit." Elias knew he couldn't let Silas leave that shack. If the overseer reached the ridge and signaled the guards, the reckoning would happen before they were ready. In the struggle, Elias' hand found a piece of sharpened cannel coal, a hard, glass-like coal variant used for carving. With a roar of ancestral rage, he drove it into the soft tissue beneath Silas's jaw. The struggle stopped. The only sound was the wind whistling through the tar paper and the heavy, ragged breathing of a miner and a princess. "What have we done?" Elias whispered, looking at the body of the king's most loyal hound. Alara didn't panic. She walked to the body, reached into Silas's pocket, and pulled out the brass key to the company armory. She looked at Elias and pointed to the mountain. They couldn't wait for the solstice. The clock had just been smashed. They had to go into the mountain now. But first, they had to dispose of Silas. They didn't bury him. They did something much more symbolic. They put Silas on his gray horse, tied his hands to the pommel, and sent the animal galloping toward the sinking creek swamp. By the time Thorn found the horse, Elias and Alara would be miles deep in the throat of shaft number 9. Chapter 4. The whispers of the ancestors as they descended into the forbidden shaft. The atmosphere changed. In the main mines, the air is stagnant and heavy, but shaft number 9 was different. It breathed. A low, rhythmic pulsing echoed through the stone. To Elias, it sounded like a pump. To Alara, it was a heartbeat. "The mountain is awake," she traced into his palm. They reached a section of the mine called the Hall of Faces. Here, the coal seams had been carved by the 1910 prisoners before they died. Not with tools, but with their fingernails. Dozens of faces stared out from the black walls, rough, jagged portraits of wives, children, and mothers. It was a gallery of the forgotten. Elias felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. They weren't just waiting to die, he realized. They were writing a testament. Alara stopped at one particular face. It was a woman, her hair flowing like a river of slate. Alara touched the coal. A small hidden compartment swung open. Inside was a weathered tin box, a miner's lunch pail. Elias opened it. It didn't contain bread or meat. It contained a death journal written by his own father. October 12, 1910, the journal began. The air is sweet today, which means the methane is coming. Mr. Thorne has locked the safety gates from the outside. He tells us it's for our protection. But he brought a man in a black robe down here this morning. They took young Billy Miller into the deep vein. We heard the boy scream. Then the air went silent. We know now. We aren't miners. We are the livestock. Elias gripped the journal, his knuckles turning white. His father hadn't died in an accident. He had been a witness to the ritual of the hollow vein. The journal detailed the society's members. It wasn't just local coal owners. It was the governor of West Virginia. It was a senator from Pennsylvania. It was a network of power that used the mountain spirits as a justification for a massive, occult industrial complex. They believed that by concentrating human suffering in the deep earth, they could control the price of energy in the upper world. It was a literalization of the gold in the blood. "We can't just kill Thorne," Elias said, his voice echoing through the hall of faces. "We have to kill the whole system." But the mountain was beginning to protest their presence. A roof talker, a fragment of rock falling from the ceiling, landed at their feet. The hollow vein was sensing the intruders. In the distance, they heard the sound of the hounds. Not the animal kind, but the specialized tunnel trackers Thorne kept on retainer, men who lived in the dark and moved like spiders through the low-clearance shafts. They were being hunted in a tomb of their own making. Chapter 5. The Battle of the Unlight. The tunnel trackers were led by a man known only as Billy Miller. He was a survivor of a different mine disaster, one who had spent so much time in the dark, his pupils had permanently dilated until his eyes were entirely black. He didn't use lanterns, he used sound. Clack, clack, clack. Miller tapped a rhythmic beat against the rails. It was a mockery of the miner's tap code. "I can hear your lungs, Vance." Miller's voice drifted through the darkness, disembodied and oily. "I can hear that girl's heart. It's beating too fast. It sounds like a drum, inviting us to dinner." Elias and Alara were trapped in a dead-end stope, a narrow tunnel where the coal had been exhausted. There was no way out except through Miller and his 3 trackers. "Hide," Elias whispered to Alara. He extinguished his carbine lamp. The darkness was absolute. This is where Elias Vance's curse became his greatest weapon. He had survived 3 cave-ins. He knew how to move in a world without light. He knew how to judge distance by the vibration of a footfall. He didn't wait for Miller to find him. Elias crawled along the ceiling joists, moving with the silence of a shadow. He felt the heat of Miller's breath as the tracker passed beneath him. Elias dropped. He didn't use a knife. He grabbed Miller's head and slammed it into the jagged edge of a sulfur ball, a hard mineral deposit in the coal. Miller went down without a sound, but the other 3 trackers heard the impact. They opened fire with short-barreled company shotguns. The muzzle flashes illuminated the tunnel in strobe-like bursts. Boom, flash. Elias was behind a timber. Boom, flash. Elias was 10 feet closer. Alara didn't stay hidden. She knew the layout of this specific tunnel from her drawings. She found a methane vent, a small hole in the wall where the explosive gas leaked from the deep mountain. She took Elias' discarded lamp. She didn't light it. She waited. As the trackers closed in on Elias, Alara threw the lamp into the methane vent. "Vance, down," she thought with such intensity it was as if she had shouted it. Elias hit the floor. The spark from the tracker's next shotgun blast ignited the gas. A wall of blue flame erupted. It wasn't a massive explosion, not yet, but it was enough to incinerate the oxygen in the tunnel. The trackers, caught in the flash fire, screamed as the air was sucked from their lungs. In the chaos, Elias and Alara slipped through a crevice pass, a gap in the rock only wide enough for someone who had lost weight from a month of starvation. They emerged into the grand shaft directly beneath the mansion's foundation. Chapter 6. The Final Reckoning and the Escape. We know the story of the collapse. We know how Elias rigged the dynamite. But what the history books missed was the interrogation of Cyrus Thorne. As the mansion groaned above them, Elias didn't just detonate the charges. He pinned Thorne against the altar. "Give me the key to the golden ledger," Elias demanded. "It's not a physical key, you fool," Thorne laughed, blood bubbling in his throat. "It's a genetic one. The book only opens for a thorn." Elias looked at Alara. She walked to the altar. She looked at the book bound in her mother's memory. She didn't need a key. She placed her hand on the cover. The mountain didn't just rumble, it shrieked. The book flew open. Inside weren't just names, there were photographs. Proof of the hollow veins reach into the highest offices of the land. "Take it," Elias said. They fled as the mansion collapsed. But the story doesn't end at the mine's exit. When Elias and Alara emerged, they weren't met with open arms. They were met by the state constabulary, police who had been paid for by the Thorne estate. "Halt, in the name of the law." Elias looked at the 500 miners who had gathered. He looked at the ledger in Alara's hands. "The law is dead," Elias shouted. "The mountain just buried it." The miners surged. This wasn't a riot, it was a war. The Battle of Blackwood lasted for 6 hours. The miners used their tools, the police used their Winchesters. In the smoke and fire of the burning company town, Elias and Alara made their move. Chapter 7. The long road to justice. They didn't go to the local police. They didn't go to the governor. They knew the hollow vein had roots everywhere. They stole a company truck, a rugged Mac AC Bulldog, and drove through the night. They headed for Washington, D.C. They were hunted the entire way. Every town they passed through, they saw their faces on wanted posters. Murders, arsonists, kidnappers. The Thorne family's PR machine was working in overdrive. They were being framed as a radical terrorist and a demented kidnap victim. They had to sleep in the woods. They had to eat raw corn from the fields. In a small diner in Virginia, they were spotted. A young waitress recognized Alara's eyes from a newspaper. Within 10 minutes, 3 black sedans were screaming down the highway. "They're coming, Elias," Alara traced into his palm. Elias drove the truck into a logging road. He knew these woods. They were like the hills of home. He lured the sedans into a soft-shoulder bog. 2 of the cars got stuck, the tires spinning uselessly in the mud. The 3rd car kept coming. Inside was the doctor, Cyrus Thorne. He was the one who had clipped Alara's voice. He was the one who wanted his vessel back. The chase ended at a cliff overlooking the Potomac River. The truck ran out of fuel. Cyrus Thorne stepped out of his car, a scalpel in one hand and a silencer-equipped pistol in the other. "Give me the ledger, Elias," Cyrus said, his voice as calm as a surgeon's. "And I'll make your death quick. I'll even let the girl live, in a cage where she belongs." Elias looked at Alara. She wasn't the girl from the shack anymore. She had the golden ledger in one hand and a safety lamp in the other. She didn't wait for Elias to fight. She walked toward her uncle. She opened the ledger to the page where her mother's name was written. She held the safety lamp to the page. "No," Cyrus shouted. "That book is worth millions. It's our history." Alara didn't burn it. She did something else. She had noticed that the ledger's ink was made of a specific type of phosphorus gold dust. It was designed to glow in the dark of the ritual chamber. In the sunlight of the cliffside, the phosphorus reacted with the heat of the lamp. The book didn't just burn, it ignited with a blinding white flash. The flare was so bright it blinded Aris Thorn. He stumbled back, his hands over his eyes, screaming about the light of the mountain. He fell. He didn't hit the rocks. He hit the water, and the Potomac took the last of the thorn line. The final conclusion, voices in the wind. Elias and Alara eventually reached the office of the Bureau of Investigation, the precursor to the FBI. They found a man named J. Edgar Hoover, who was young and hungry for a scandal that would make his career. When Hoover saw the charred, but still readable, pages of the Golden Ledger, the hollow vein was finished. The Great Purge of 1923 saw dozens of politicians and industrialists go to prison. It was the largest corporate occult crackdown in American history. But the world was told a different story. The public was told it was a tax evasion and monopoly case. The occult rituals, the hollow vein, the sacrifices in shaft number 9, all of it was classified as top secret. Elias Vance and Alara Thorn were given new identities. They were settled in a small coastal town in Oregon. Elias lived to be 80. He spent his days building wooden boats, his lungs finally clear in the Pacific air. And Alara, she never regained her voice. But she became a famous, silent author. She wrote books under a pseudonym about the shadows of the mountains. Her books were bestsellers, though no one knew the fiction was actually a memoir. In 1971, a construction crew in West Virginia found a small tin box in a sealed-off section of an old coal mine. Inside was a death journal and a piece of sharpened coal. When they tried to investigate, the Department of Energy stepped in and seized the site. The box vanished. But sometimes, on the anniversary of the solstice, the miners in Blackwood County say they can still hear a sound coming from the deep earth. It's not a rumble, it's not a cave-in, it's a rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. We are here, it says. We remember. Because the truth isn't something you can bury in a mountain. It's not something you can clip from a throat. The truth is like coal. It's born in the dark, under immense pressure, and when it finally catches fire, it burns forever. What do you think of this journey? Do you believe there are still hollow veins running beneath our modern world? Are the kings of today any different from Cyrus Thorn? Leave a comment below. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the powerless have the most dangerous stories of all, then subscribe to Right of Dread. Share this with someone who isn't afraid of the dark. I'll see you in the next mystery.